I know you're probably expecting me to open with a joke or make fun of DC, but you know what? When I was writing this review, I just kept coming back to this. We talk about the Superman curse as if it's just an urban legend, but when you think about it, there have been some truly tragic things happen to people associated with the Man of Steel. And as much as I've played my tiny little part in criticizing the work of Zack Snyder in the past, perhaps even perpetuating the tiny, pointless war between Marvel and DC, and while I may have some criticism for Justice League, let's not lose perspective. The man lost a daughter, and he walked away from a film that he had worked so hard to be a part of, a film he worked years to become a part of, and that's gotta be tough for a lot of reasons. Say what you will about the man's comic book work, but I think in that instance, he showed us what true heroes can be like. A respectful tribute in the opening, already better than you expected from this review, isn't it? And already we are at the thesis of the review. I went in with very low expectations when it comes to Justice League, and yet it was better than I expected. But ironically enough, that doesn't mean it was different than I expected. Wait, what? This is like the Flashpoint Paradox cameo in Batman v Superman. I think I'm already confusing the audience. What I mean by that? Well, firstly, there were issues within the film, as I expected. However, there weren't as many issues as I expected. And secondly, Justice League was what I expected because, sadly, it's predictable. Sadly, all superhero films are fairly predictable at this point. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is so formulaic, its DNA is practically Mickey Mouse shaped, but what I mean with Justice League is it's predictable stylistically. Especially considering who was directing, and don't forget, there were 2 directors. And between the styles of Snyder and Whedon, you can pretty much pinpoint the exact moment when they switch. You know what? Scratch that. It's more like a giant Frankenstein-style toggle. The darkness that Snyder brings isn't just metaphorical either. The opening sequences that he shot are very dimly lit, but more importantly, it's the pessimistic politics that he practices in many of his films, including a dark opening montage that shows just how bad things have become, much like Watchmen. Unlike Watchmen, though, Justice League's over-the-top dark style didn't have a clever script. It wasn't political, it wasn't subtextual, and so the opening sequence featuring Batman, which I was very much looking forward to, is a perfect example. It just came across as a mixed bag. And who knows, maybe co-writer Chris Terrio wrote that part. Maybe Whedon did. You see, we can look at this film as an olive branch between Marvel and DC. DC, when Snyder had to step aside, brought in one of Marvel's former big guns. And regardless of how much Whedon actually contributed to this film, unfortunately, there were some common mistakes that he didn't fix. When Phase 2 started, when Marvel just seemed unstoppable, I lost track of how many people complained about generic Marvel villains. Well, let me introduce you to the king. But before I do that, and to be fair, DC in this instance was in a no-win situation when it comes to the villain, because they've tried to do something new with their villains in the past. They tried something new with icons like Lex Luthor and the Joker, and it backfired hard. So this time they play it safe, and we got Ares and the new god king of horny helmets, Steppenwolf. Well, you don't know what to... No. You are not sullying one of Canada's greatest rock bands of all time through association. Where do you start with Steppenwolf? He was the very definition of evil for the sake of being evil. No depth, no motivation to do what he was doing aside from the fact that he's really evil. The script was terrible for this character, just generic evil villain trope after generic evil villain trope. And even the CGI was awful. I mean, come on, DC. You didn't learn from Marvel? You never cast Kieran Hines as a supervillain. It doesn't go well. I try not to get involved with the beef between Marvel fanboys and DC fanboys, but the fact is I never want to hear a DC fan once again claim that Marvel has the most generic villains. I never use this word, but I cringed every time Steppenwolf was on screen. And if you're the kind of person who defends that character specifically, I'm gonna say the same thing to you that I said every time he appeared. Are you for real? I know this has nothing to do with the directing style of either Whedon or Snyder, but I really want to know who approved the computer graphics. Not only does Steppenwolf look really bad, but I've said this since the beginning, since the trailer came out. Who approved Cyborg? The character design looks terrible, and the animation in the finished film really didn't help. And of course, there's something you can blame Whedon for. All the reshoots. Which means it's his fault an amateur FX team had to remove a Kryptonian mustache. One major criticism I have for the flawed god I call Whedon, and yes, I do have criticism, is when I was watching one sequence in particular, a sequence that was undoubtedly his contribution, I felt that I was watching DC's The Avengers. Now, I absolutely love The Avengers, but I didn't need to watch another version of it. And I'm pretty sure the DC fans who hated Marvel wouldn't want to see that either. When Whedon was brought in, who knows how much actual influence he had on the story, but there is one thing that I recognize that he does extremely well, and that is he knows how to create tension between the heroes. I'm not just talking about when they fight one another, although that was a very fun sequence to watch. I'm talking about why they fight one another, the motivation behind what they do, because otherwise these fight sequences are empty and patronizing. And I just know that Whedon wrote those scenes because his co-writer Chris Terrio also wrote Batman v Superman. And that film had zero understanding of any of the characters it portrayed. The ideologies of Batman and Superman were so jaded, so dark and misguided, it actually angered me. And once again, I just know that that toggle flipped because suddenly somebody writing this film understood that the most interesting conflict comes in differences of ideologies. The most interesting scene comes when they're in the Batcave and Bruce begins to attack Diana's romantic sensibilities, proving to her that it's really not going to get the job done in this situation. And she becomes so upset with him that she almost breaks a rib when she shoves him away. That is beautiful conflict. These are the characters I know from the comic books. This is the Batman I know. He's cold, he's calculated, and he's not concerned with offending Diana's sensibilities. And Diana shows you that she truly feels that the world is a wholesome place, proving what she says in her first action sequence, that she's a believer. I really could go on and on about that scene because there's so much that works in it, unlike the rest of the film. That sequence to me seemed like the only time that the actors actually got direction. Aquaman in other scenes was basically just playing Jason Momoa. He never really took anything seriously. The Flash was painfully, obviously unfunny, and in other scenes I found that Ben Affleck didn't even want to be there. I will give credit to newcomer Ray Fisher as Cyborg though, because he had some really nice scenes at the beginning of the film. Maybe rewrites? I have read a lot of people say that this would have been a better film if Snyder could have stayed on. Not a chance. Whedon breathed as much life as he could have into this film and it still wasn't enough. If Snyder stayed on, it could have been a more cohesive film, but it certainly wouldn't have been a better film. And I think people are forgetting, Snyder is a man of visuals, not a man of vision. I have to give this film a lot of credit though. There was so much piling up against it, it was really in a no-win situation. The tragedy with Snyder's family, the different controversies with Whedon, Affleck, and Ratner, the fact that Affleck was so vocal with wanting out of the franchise, and Danny Elfman only getting a month to do the score. With this film not being a complete disaster, and the fact that DC actually made me excited about things they might do in the future, that is a victory. But the film itself is still a burden. Poll question, who's your favorite Justice League member? Doesn't have to be from the movie. As always, leave your answers in the comment section below, but until next time, school's out. Hey Real students, thanks for watching. If you want to subscribe to Real School, click that round Real School logo right beside me. Also click that damn notification bell so you're aware of all of Real School's new content. You can follow me on Twitter, and of course, if you get anything out of Real School, you can always give a little back. Just click the link in the description below or the button down there, and you can become part of my Patreon team.